Yo, everybody. Before we get into the podcast itself, I want to let you know about something exciting. Off Panel launched a Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel as a way to help me pay for the show and make it better than ever. If you enjoy the show and want to support it, consider backing on there for exclusive written and audio content, early access to the podcast, and more. And now, on with this week's episode. Welcome to Off Panel. Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the guy behind the YouTube series Strip Panel Naked and the digital comics magazine Panel X Panel. It's Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou. Thanks for coming on, Hassan.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I do want to give a quick shout out. We talked about this before I started recording. Many podcasters had to die so I could live. There are a lot of podcasters out there who have had you on their show, and they've totally butchered their name, but I learned from them. Thank you, podcasters. You're amazing.
It's that's not even my real name. It's just difficult on purpose, just to throw people off. My real name's just John Smith.
Oh man,
it's all a clever pseudonym.
It's part of your brand.
Yeah.
It's like if people have to work to pronounce your name, they're like, I'm gonna remember this guy, so I always get his name right.
I like the fact it's difficult though. Like there is a little part of me that's kind of like that enjoys the fact it's not an easy name. Like, because my brother has dropped the Elhaou part, for example, because he's just had enough.
Mm-hmm.
Of like people not knowing how to say our family name. But I quite like to see people like have a go and get it right. I don't know why, but I just do.
I think it is kind of interesting how like your relationship with your name works. Like, I always hated my middle name, and I always tried to ignore the fact that instead of a junior, I'm a second. But my full name is David Leroy Harper II. And I always thought Leroy was like a really country sounding name until I realized that in French it means the king. And I was like, whoa, I'm the king II. That is awesome.
I mean, I have no idea what my surname. Well, because my surname was like something else. Because my dad's Algerian, and then when France were in Algeria for the hundreds of years they were there, they had the problem of they couldn't pronounce it, so they just got angry and changed it. I suppose you can do that when you're in charge of the country. So they just changed my family name, and I have no idea. I don't think anyone really knows what it means. It's just an easier way to say our Algerian name.
So they got angry and changed your name because they couldn't pronounce it to something that other people still can't pronounce. It's amazing. The world is an amazing place.
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah.
So I want to talk about all of your growing list of projects. I want to emphasize growing. Your energy for coming up with new things is really an astounding thing. But I wanted to start at the beginning. What's your comic book background? What is Hassan's comic book origin story? How'd you get into comics?
I got into comics because a friend of mine, when I was probably like year 8 or 9, maybe at school, he was a big comics fan, and I'd just never read a comic that wasn't like the Beano or the Dandy, which is just these like two British, like kids comics. And he gave me like an Essential Spider-Man volume 3, maybe volume 3, 4. Those like black and white reprints. And I just never read one before, and I had like a bit of superhero knowledge from like the X-Men cartoon and stuff like that. But he gave me this thing, and I just never really seen anything like it before, and it just sort of blew my mind a little bit. It was like just like weird to me, it was like weird madness on a page, and all I'd read was these kind of like 3 or 4 page long, at most, like kids comic stories of like Dennis the Menace and stuff. And so there was this like 20-page story of like this guy like beating the crap out of like a guy with octopus arms and stuff, and it was like it was weird, and it was just the perfect time, like it just caught my imagination like completely, and then I went straight from that to Watchmen. And then I read Watchmen, and I was like, whoa, comics are amazing. And then that was it, and then I was hooked.
How old were you when you read Watchmen?
Like 14, 15, 14,
okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like 6.
I was like, wow, that is one hell of a leap. My God.
Well, I was really into, like, I was a big book reader, because my dad would always put like a book in front of me. Sure. The moment I finished a novel, he would give me like another one, and then they just got progressively, I suppose, like they were just fairly advanced books, because I just was always reading. So when I was looking for the comic stuff, that I think that was the thing that I felt a bit like the stories were fairly simple that was just that from that one Spider-Man book from whenever it was the 60s or 70s or whatever. And then as soon as I got Watchmen, it felt a bit more like novelistic in its
Sure.
approach, which is probably a little bit more what I was used to. And so I think that's probably why that was the thing that really, really sold it for me. But it was just the weirdness of the whole thing. Like, it was just the imagination of the whole thing. I just, like, it sounds weird to say you never experienced anything like that, but I really hadn't kind of like had anything like that before. I just really never seen anything like that before, and I just thought it was absolutely fascinating.
I do think one of the funny things and the underrated things about reading comics when you're a kid in like that manner, when you like grab this essential volume of Spider-Man, it's like when you're a
Mhm.
kid, you pick this up and you don't know what's going on. You have like, who's this octopus guy? Like, why does this guy have spider powers? What's going on? But like when you're a kid, that's like a feature. But when you're an adult, you're like, how do we make this easier to jump onto? And I think that's kind of fascinating. It's like when I was a kid, I started reading X-Men and I was just like, you're trying to understand what's going on with Jean Grey. Like, what is Wolverine's background? No one knows. What is the story here? Like, it was really confusing, but at the same time, it was like, this was before Wikipedia, and like when we kind of felt like we needed to know everything instantly.
Yeah.
And I feel like to a certain degree, like that made me like it more. I was like, I want to learn about this. It's fascinating.
I think, well, when you're an adult, I think you like there is a desire for knowledge. It's in a way like there is a desire that everything needs to make sense in a way, or also that, or maybe that you've got to learn something from it, or maybe that I don't know, maybe that's just me. But when you're a kid, it's just more like, whoa, like I
Yeah.
just want to get like everything. I just want to experience this stuff. And as an adult, I guess you just become a bit more jaded, and you're like, I don't know who this person is, and therefore I'm not interested. It's like because I do that sometimes reading superhero books now. If I like dive into like a new issue and I'm like, I don't know, I've got no frame of reference for this, and like I'm just gonna put it away. But like if I was 14, I'd be like, there's like colors and stuff, and that guy's got wings, and that's cool. But like now I'm like, there's no start and end to this, and therefore I'm not interested.
Oh God, if there's no start and end to it as a key component for you, you are totally hosed in superhero comics.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you got into comics. You were all about that. One thing I think is interesting about your background is you are a film director and you have a background in film. I mean, I presume you probably grew up watching film too, right? You're a big movie guy.
Yeah, I mean, well, comics was my first thing. Like when I was 16, 17, like when I think it's the same in America as well anyway, but in England, you basically got to make your big life decisions when you're like 17 years old.
Sure.
And that's it. That's like, which is really, because imagine if you like, imagine now if you said to someone, an adult, like you've got a 17-year-old's going to choose your life direction. You'd be
No.
like, please don't do that to me. But that's just how it works. And when I was 17, I was like, about 16, I said I want to be like a comic book illustrator. And I really like drawing. I wasn't very good at it, but I really liked it. And I'd never really like seen a lot of like good films before. Like my favorite film was Meet the Parents or something, probably, or like Analyze That, maybe.
Something that involves Robert De Niro in a comedic role.
Yeah, that was my niche. That was my film niche. But my dad played me. My dad put on Fistful of Dollars because in Algeria, in my dad's village, they used to have like this guy who would come round every month or 2 months, and he just had like a projector and a bunch of films
Nice.
dubbed in French. And you just had to take your own chair to the town hall, and he would just project a film, and you just give him like a couple of dinar, Algerian. Is that maybe that's what it is? No one will know. I'll just say it's dinar. And then you watch this film in the town hall, and then that was it. And then you didn't see a film for another couple of months. But my dad said they were always westerns. And he remembered Fistful of Dollars, and put it on DVD and brought it home one day. And I watched Fistful of Dollars, and this is a really stupid thing to say, but I'd never really seen like an actual film before, like a film that was like trying to be like art or good in a way. And again, it was like a really similar experience to reading that Spider-Man volume. Like I just was like, I didn't realize that you could do that. And that just changed. Like I just became like, I'm very much a person that when I get into something, I'm really into it. Like I can just listen to the same like album relentlessly for like months on end with
Hmm.
not listening to nothing else, and then then I'll be done with it. And I was kind of like that with Fistful of Dollars. I was like, I watched that. I watched For a Few Dollars More. I watched The Good and the Bad and the Ugly. I watched Once Upon a Time in the West, and I just devoured like a bunch of westerns. And then I moved on and started looking at European cinema and stuff like that. And then I realized that storytelling was always the thing that interested me, not necessarily drawing, but
Hmm.
just being able to tell stories. And then I realized that, if I had a camera, I didn't need to know how to draw. I just need to know how to compose shots and tell a story visually. And that just seemed a bit easier than actually learning how to draw. So I kind of switched and then went to study film at university. Yeah.
I do think that's really interesting. That was one thing I was going to bring up. Is I do think the film background is an interesting, like, I don't know, thing to pair with Strip Pound Naked, because it does seem like you kind of approach everything from a storytelling point of view, and that's the underrated thing about art. People, like, when you read reviews and you read like people talking about art, it so often is about stylistic choices or like how
Mm.
detailed stuff is and everything like that. But in reality, it all comes down to storytelling. It's like, how can this artist convey what is happening in the story in the most effective manner, rather than like, oh, he has very detailed backgrounds and the etching
Mhm.
in his arm is amazing or something like that. And so it really, do you feel that like your kind of film background and like your interest in art, comic art in that way, kind of pair together naturally to make Strip Pound Naked kind of what it is?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I learned real quick in film is I was making films for no money, like literally no money, because I was when we were students and we had nothing to put for a budget. So what you learned very very quick was that money doesn't make the film, but storytelling does. Like
Mm-hmm.
I could put loads of really expensive stuff on the screen and people will kind of be like, whoa, that looks incredible. But really, what's going to like buy you in if I've got nothing to kind of wow you or like dazzle you with it's a good story, and you learn very quick that that's what you need. They're the core skills that you need to be able to draw someone from the start of your film to 5-10 minutes later for a short to get them all the way through it. Because you're asking a lot for an audience who doesn't know, don't know the actors, don't know who you are, don't know anything about the story or whatever. They're just you've got to really buy them in really really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the same. It's the same with comics. If you're working in a realm where you don't know the characters or you're a new reader or whatever, you've really got to work hard to get someone to care about this for 24 pages and then get them to come back again next time. And I would say for the most part, that's not anything to do with how good of an artist you are in terms of like detail or rendering or life likability. That's not a word, but that's where the storytelling comes in. You could be like, you could draw the most beautifully rendered backgrounds, but 6 issues later, that person's going to forget that story immediately. And I'm sure you've seen films where they've been like really really beautiful films, but the moment you leave the cinema, you can't remember really what happened, and that film has like no lasting impact on you. And that I always see like that as the difference between like the artists who maybe they're like really really good in terms of like that looks like a dude wearing a costume, and the artist who can tell you a good story.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, 100%. Yeah. No, I feel like I've seen that film a lot of times actually. But yeah, no, I mean, it really does all make sense. And actually, the problem, I got my mind wandered because I came up with an idea to suggest to you for Strip Pound Naked, which is going to take us at a totally different side. I don't know if you've ever covered this, but I feel like an extremely valuable resource for you to approach would be how to tell a number one story effectively. I don't know if that would fit your realm of Strip Pound Naked, but I bet comic creators would like crap themselves over that, because that's a tricky thing. It's like, you're right. It's you have like, let's say, a 20-page issue. You have one issue. There's only one chance at a first impression. If you can't hook the person with the storytelling, with the characters, and have a lasting impact past that first issue, they're not going to come back for number two, and they're certainly not going to come
Yeah.
back for number three. And it is a tricky thing. But sorry, that's a complete aside.
No, well, I think what's the thing with comics and anything that isn't like cinema in like a dark room. Because if you go and pay like $10 or whatever to go, I don't know how much cinema tickets are in America. If you go pay $10 or whatever to go see a film, what there is a difference between that and sitting down like in your house to read something, or even
Sure.
sitting down in your house to watch TV. Because when you're in a dark room, you feel a little bit more like you're gonna
Immersed.
sit there and just yeah, and you kind of are gonna accept a bit more because you've paid money. You're in a cinema with other people. You don't really want to be like the dude who gets up and walks out like 5 seconds in because the first sort of couple of shots aren't interesting. You'll
Right.
you'll naturally give it a bit more time. Whereas when you're at home, if you start reading a novel and you read like the first page and you kind of go, or even a comic, and you read the first page and you go, eh. You
Yeah.
might skip in a couple of pages, you might look at it and go, I don't know. And so it's, I think comics, anything that you absorb at home, that's like that's also like a thing I have with like how video on demand is changing film and stuff like that, which is a whole other conversation. But there is a difference in the way like people are consuming stories, and so it makes it. I think it's so much harder nowadays to hook someone into the first couple of pages of a story than it would have been like 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Hmm. It is kind of fascinating that we're going to go in a crazy path. I swear to God. But I mean, it is kind of fascinating because I do think that the on demand and the streaming thing has kind of changed things in some ways. Like, I don't know if it positively is the right word, but in a significant way, because it's like people binge watch and they'll binge watch something that they don't necessarily like just because they're like, oh, Netflix tells me to watch the second episode. I will keep watching it.
Yeah.
And it is kind of interesting. But yeah, I think the same thing kind of was happening with comics when Comixology had in-app purchasing, but that's kind of gone now. Well, not kind of gone; it just is gone. Um,
Yeah.
anyways, I'm taking us into a dark path, a way different direction. But I want to get back to Strip Panel Naked. So, Strip Panel Naked is your YouTube series where, quote unquote, you show some of the cool things lurking in the panels of some of your favorite comics, which I think very much understates the show. So
Thanks.
I want to start with the basics. What
Yeah.
made you decide to start up Strip Pound Naked? Like, did you kind of look at the comic book landscape and see a vacuum, or was it more as just something you wanted to do?
Yeah, I was watching a lot of like every frame of painting, and I'd watched like a handful of those episodes of that, and realized that because I'm not like I wasn't like a very big like YouTube kind of guy. I wasn't like a big like I had loads of subscriptions to stuff. I didn't really watch YouTube for more than like behind the scenes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right?
Right.
So I didn't really, I wasn't really aware of like that much that was going on. But I started like Googling because I was always wondering if there's like a comic book version of strip not strip of every frame of painting, and I was kind of having a look around and I couldn't find anything that sort of fit that kind of niche. There was like like good like analysis channels and people talking about, and like Nerdwriter had kind of done some stuff that was kind of similar and things like that, but there wasn't anything that really like broke down storytelling, and that has always been the thing that is like super excites me. I've got like shelves and shelves of stuff in my house of just like film books,
Hmm.
because you get loads of them with film. You get like you can get them on like individual films, like a whole book about like the storytelling techniques of The Shining or whatever. There's tons and tons, and I just couldn't find anything that was quite like that for comics. And a lot of the stuff that I did find for comics was maybe, for me, this is probably says more about me than anyone else, but they were a little bit dry. And so I
Hmm.
wanted to try and make something. So I had the idea of trying to make something that was a bit more less dry, a bit more accessible, maybe. And also just get a bunch of stuff off my chest so that I didn't have to keep like saying it at my girlfriend all the time. Because
Nothing
that
you have said so far do I feel more than what you just said. I talk to my wife about comics all the time, and she's like, "I don't care about comic sales." My God, she doesn't say that. She's
that
very
was
understanding, but I'm just like always like you. There's no way you can care about this much as you seem to care about it. Anyways,
you can
sorry.
see it in the eyes, can't you? You
Yeah,
can like
exactly.
the truth, the truth is in the eyes. No, that was the thing. Like it's the same thing. It was like my girlfriend would come home and I'd be like, "Hey, look at this amazing sequence in I don't know Batman," and she'd be like, "Cool," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm not getting what I need from you for this situation." No, so what I did was I sat down and I did one on Moon Knight. So Moon Knight was like the first episode, and it was also the comic that got me back into comics after a while of not really reading comics.
Interesting.
Um, well, I knew, so when I was like 17, 18, I ran a website called Indie Reviews, and we covered like loads of small press comics in the UK.
Hmm.
It only lasted for about a year or so. But one of the books that we like, it was between me and my brother, and one of the books that we were a big fan of was a book called Hero Killers, which
Hmm.
was illustrated by, at the time, a very, very unknown artist called Declan Shalvey.
Hmm.
And I was a big fan of that, and I interviewed Dec for the website and everything. And then I was like just browsing Comixology, and I saw the name Shalvey next to Moon Knight, and I was like, that can't be a coincidence. So and realized it was the same artist. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then I saw it was Warren Ellis, and I was like, oh wow, that's amazing. I love Warren Ellis. And then downloaded that on Comixology and smashed through the trade, the 6-issue trade. And then I was like, okay, let's read some more comics. And that was like that was just by chance, basically one day just scrolling through Comixology.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I just I really felt like an urge to talk about that book, and I like wrote it in January last year. 2016, and I recorded it. And like Helen came home, and I was like really excited about showing her it. And I was like, "Look at this! What do you reckon to this?" And she was like, "Yeah, it's cool, but like you sound really boring." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that wasn't the reaction I was hoping for." But thank you. And I listened to it back, and I was like, I do sound because I have a naturally monotone voice. I have to really try to put some pizzazz into my vocals. But I got like a bit depressed about it, and I was like, yeah, she's right. This is well boring, even though that's not what she said.
Wait, I want to take a quick aside and say that one of my questions I was going to ask down the line was how important do you think the success or to the success of Strip Pound Naked is your awesome voice? So different strokes for different folks.
Well, yeah, it's but the thing is, it was really boring, and I would give you an example of it, but like everyone would stop listening immediately. It was really monotone, and there was no emotion in it because I think I was trying to be like serious,
Oh
like
yeah.
quote like with quotate like my fingers raised. It was like kind of no, so serious talking about comics.
Hmm.
And I left it on I left it on my hard drive, and then we got a puppy like a few months later, and I was just at home like watching the puppy sleep, and I went on my computer and I found the project again, and I listened to it, and I was like you take a step away from something and you go back and you realize like what is wrong with it, which was in that instance was my voice, and I re-recorded with a smile on my face and tried to get a bit enthused about a topic I was genuinely very enthused about. And then that was it, and I released it, and then yeah, I've just been doing one basically every week since.
That's awesome. Yeah, I totally understand. Like it's hard to figure out tones in those types of situations because I remember when I first started off panel, I was recording an outro, and I think it was like the third or fourth episode, and I remember I got feedback from somebody that's saying like, I think they said that like it sounds like you hate this or something like that. And I was just like, maybe I should try to sound a little bit more sprightly as I do this.
Yeah,
I mean, it is kind of awkward because it's like if you're having a
that's great.
conversation, if you're having a conversation, it's easy to like sound conversational and like a person and everything like that because you're just talking. But
Yeah.
if you're just speaking at people, it can be hard to get that tone right and to sound like a person. I want to give you credit. One of the things that I think works really well while you're doing it is every once in a while you kind of have like a little laugh. Like I
Oh,
don't.
it's so annoying though, isn't it?
No, it's
I
perfect.
I
Like
get
every
annoyed
time
by it when the thing is I don't do it on purpose, but when I have to edit my voice, oh god, that's annoying.
Oh yeah, it's the worst. I actually hated my voice before I started podcasting, and now I'm kind of indifferent to it because I've heard it like I don't know a lot.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
mean, I think the laugh is like a kind of funny thing that just ties you to it because it makes you feel so much more human. Not that you're a robot or something like that, but it's an underrated part of it. And that was one thing I was curious about is like how it kind of evolved. And it sounds like the voice was one of the big things. So do you go in with a script? Like when you go into Strip Pound Naked and you're recording it, do you have a script or is it kind of off the cuff or how do you do it?
Yeah, it's really scripted. I could not do it. There's little bits where it's because yeah, it's fully scripted. But when I'm recording it, sometimes like I'll feel like I maybe need to add like a sentence in or something just to bridge a bit where maybe it's not been written very well on my part. But that is always the funniest bit to edit because that one sentence takes so long to record. Because if I don't write it down, I can't speak. It's like I'll do the sentence might literally just be which leads us onto this page,
Hmm.
but that will take so long for me to record. That will be like I'll do that like 12 takes of that because I can't get that like that sentence out of me in a way that sounds natural. So yeah, I usually end up just like rewriting it on the spot. But yeah, it's all like super scripted. It's all I don't know if it comes across like that, but I have to script it. I have to write it beforehand because it's just the way it evolves is like usually what it is just like a Google Doc with loads of like bullet points of just stuff.
Hmm.
And then it's I spend a couple of hours just sitting down and try to figure out ways of writing it. Sometimes it comes straight away, and that I love those weeks. And sometimes it's really sometimes it's really hard. It's really difficult. I'm sure you've had the same writing about comics. It's like sometimes you just sit down and it just flows,
Oh yeah.
and then sometimes you sit down and you're like, I don't know how to do this. Why did I think this was a good idea?
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, like I always describe it as I've made this reference. Sometimes I think I reference like specific things too many times to the point where my listeners like, we get it, Jesus, and stop saying that over and over. But like, have you ever seen the movie Hackers?
Oh, a long time ago.
Yeah, well, there's this one or when Johnny Lee Miller, the main character, is like
Yeah.
sitting at his computer doing his like extremely fake hacking. There's like this. There's a scene where it's like there's all these like sigma symbols and like mathematical equations flying by his head as if that's how
Yeah.
hacking actually works. And it's like that's how I always kind of envision myself when I'm on a roll writing. I'm like sitting there and I'm just like all these like mathematical. Like, instead, it's like like sales chart and like I don't know X-Men and things like that. That's what's flying by my head. I would love to have a GIF made of me doing that, but yeah, I mean it really does come down to flow. But I think the reason why it doesn't, I would wager that most people wouldn't imagine that it is as tightly scripted as you say it is, just because it does feel very naturalistic.
Hmm.
But I
Well,
don't know.
that's nice to hear. But it is very tightly scripted, like like word for word scripted.
So for just for like kind of comparison's sake, for my podcast, what I try to do is I always actually go in with a full list of written out questions, like written in my own speak, so it sounds like when I'm actually reading them, I am actually speaking like a human being as opposed to doing like an email interview via phone.
Yeah.
But like I have to like a lot of times most of my episodes at this point are just like those asides that you were talking about. But you have to work in that. I mean, your medium is completely different. Like mine is supposed to be conversational. Yours is you're speaking to people via medium, and it's not, you have to do that. But I am curious. Going back a little bit, how long have you always read comics in the way that you show them in Strip Pal Naked? Like, have you ever always kind of gotten analytical into them in that way?
Ever since I did my degree, because that's the real, like, no one tells you this when you sign up to do like a film production degree, but what you do is they teach you very quickly to learn how to like look at stuff differently, and not like in a really like artsy way. I mean, just literally like when you watch a film, just look at it differently. It's very hard to just sit down and watch a film after you've done 3 years of a film production degree, because what you do is you start looking at how it was made, and you start looking at why the choices that they were made have been made, as opposed to like enjoying the film.
I imagine
So
that really changed your relationship with Analyze That.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, and the sequel. Yeah, no, it does it like it's weird because it's like you go and watch it, and like I for some reason I have like a really vivid memory of watching Gran Torino, the Clint Eastwood film,
Mm-hmm.
and just finding loads of weird faults with the cinematography. Not faults, but like things that I wouldn't necessarily have done. And the way that it looked, you could tell immediately it looked a lot cheaper than other Clint Eastwood films through a lot of the different, a lot of stuff that was going on with the cinematography in there, that just made it seem a little bit cheaper than other films I'd seen with Clint Eastwood in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like weird stuff like that. You just start noticing things. And they drill that into you. So ever since then, so since about like 2000 and well 2000 2001, nope, 2011. I'm not as old as I thought I was. Since about 2010 2011, that's when a lot of stuff I consumed, like TV and film, and then eventually a little bit later, and then when I got back into comics, like you just start looking at stuff like that because it's like like it's when if you're an architect or something, that you would look at a building differently because you know what's gone into it. And it's the same thing like if you're a such a crap analogy. I don't know if that why architect was the first thing that came into my head.
I know it's
Did we
very
mention architects
yeah.
earlier?
My wife is an architect, so that
That
works
was
really
it.
well for me. I want to point out that you will find very quickly that it's less that they point out buildings, but it's more like weird specifics. Like my wife hates watching movies sometimes where glass breaks because she's like, "That's not how glass breaks. That's not how glass breaks."
But that's it, right? It's like when you know how something works, it becomes a little bit annoying and a
Yeah.
little bit frustrating to consume that sort of stuff because you know what's gone into it and stuff. And that's why I always hate that's why I also really hate talking about stuff I don't like, because even if I don't like something like a comic or a film or whatever, I know what's gone into that. Like it's so much work to make something that isn't very good
Right.
already, right? And it's ridiculous amounts of work and look to make something that's really good, but to make something that even just make something that's bad, it's still a lot of work.
Right.
So it's like that's why I always have this kind of that's why I don't like talking about stuff that isn't good necessarily, or like that I don't particularly like on Strip Pal Naked and stuff like that, because there's so many good examples of stuff to choose from that does work, but also it's like whoever made that did not consciously go out of their way to make something bad, and it's still there's still a lot of work in that. I don't know where I was going with that.
No. It was a good point though. And it is a very good transition to my next question. I was going to ask about how you choose your subjects because like the Moon Knight one was making a good action sequence in comics, and you've also touched on like how artists control movement to shifting, and you've also done like I really like the lettering one that you did with on Asterios Polyp because A, I love Asterios Polyp, and B, like I mean lettering is a very fascinating thing because Letter Appreciation Day was the day before we're recording this. It's not going up for a little bit, but I think your ultimate point was like lettering shouldn't be invisible necessarily, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, and I do think that's true. I think like this is again another aside, but it's like I feel like like I talked to Phonographics way before he was like famous, or Saga Phonographics or Injection Phonographics and everything like that, when he was doing a Zuda comic, and he had said like he's like a letter's job is to not stand out because like if he stands out, he's probably done something wrong because like people only really notice them when they're not doing a good job. But I do think that there's a point to like style, like to like having like some level of fit, like as long as the style fits the book, it makes sense. Like a good example for me is
Yeah.
obviously David Mazzucchelli doing Serious Polyp is a good example. Dustin Harbin on Casanova is a really good example. But it's like I like that one because lettering is something that's underappreciated, and I think that was a really good example. But so the point is you run the gamut in terms of subjects. How do you decide what you're going to feature? Is it like is it typically based off of what you're actively reading, or do you start with an idea of what you want to explore and then find the right subject to fit that topic?
It does depend. It's worked both ways more often than not because I'm if I was a little bit cleverer, I would probably like do a bunch in advance, like I'm sure that you do, and I would probably have a bunch lined up, like ready to go. I'm not that smart, so what I do instead is like I literally am making one every single week, and so sometimes it just comes down to like what have I read recently that I found interesting. Sometimes it's like I might read something that sparks an idea and it makes me think of another book I can remember, and I'll go into that book and have a look at that and see if that works. I'd say like it's like 9 out of 10 times it's more what have I been reading recently that I feel passionate enough about to talk about.
Sure.
And sometimes there's some weeks where I'm like not very much. So like what else? Let's go back into the notes, and I've got like a doc with like loads of notes of stuff I've had at various points that little things I'd like to talk about at some stage, and I kind of look at those and go like, is there anything I can apply that to? Is there blah blah blah? Like, can I do a bit more research into that one? But it like a lot of the time, yeah, it really just comes down to like what have I read recently? And that's also quite tough because I'm struggling to find the time to read tons and tons of comics at the moment. So that also makes it a little bit tougher. But like the latest one, the Southern Cross episode, which just went up to the day that we're recording this. That was a weird one because I read Southern Cross like months and months ago, the first volume. And then the other day I watched like 10 minutes of The Shining, and I really can't remember why I did, but I watched about 10 minutes of The Shining, and then it made me think about Southern Cross. This is the weird, like I don't know how my brain works, like because it's such a weird connection, but there was something about it that made me start thinking about Southern Cross, and I went back through and grabbed the Southern Cross trade and started flicking through it and having a look at it, and then realized that I'd noticed some kind of connection between that and The Shining, and then I started writing things down and started looking at both of them and stuff, and so that like sometimes it's just like weird random things that'll spark an idea, and it'll just like raise a little flag of maybe something that I've just sort of like bookmarked in my head for like later use. So I don't. That's not a very good answer to your question, but
No,
I'm not sure I know how to answer it better.
No, I mean honestly, like it's perfect. I mean, 9 out of 10 times you go with the book first, but it is I did want to underline one thing, and it's an underrated part of, like, not to make our lives seem hard or something like that, but it's like there's a grind, like going out and doing it every week and finding something to do on Strip Pound Naked. Do you feel like you kind of suffer from the grind every once in a while? Like, have you given yourself breaks or anything like that to kind of make sure that you don't get burned out on having to churn out the material every week? Because I'm not to discount what I do, but your thing is a lot harder than my thing. I just yell at people for an hour, and then I edit it lightly and put it up on the internet.
I've had there's been weeks where it's just impossible. Like even if I know what I want to write about, I just can't get my brain going. Like, so like the other week I was doing one I think it was the second Asterios Polyp episode actually about the changing art styles,
Hmm.
and I just I just couldn't write it. Like my brain was just melting, and it was, I hadn't had a week break for a while, I think, at that stage. And it was just, yeah, I just really couldn't. Like, that was one where because I talked to, so I've got Dennis Camp, who's a comic writer, who's
Hmm.
basically like my therapist. And so if I'm ever struggling with anything, I just sort of message him, and I'm just like, I can't, like, my brain's not working. Can you take a look at this for me? So he like took a look at that and like wrote maybe a paragraph of it. And then that helped me a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes you need that, because sometimes, it's very lonely when you're just like writing this stuff by yourself and recording it by yourself and editing it
Hmm.
by yourself. And so all the pre-work that goes into it is just like you're on your own, just trying to figure it out. Yeah, so there is times when it's really really difficult, and there's times where I just can't do it. Like last week, I just couldn't. There was just nothing I could do. I tried writing a couple of episodes, and I just couldn't put anything down that I felt good about. So I just took a week off,
Yeah.
which I probably need to do a little bit more. I think, just probably for my own sanity. Yeah. So yeah, it's really tough, and the finding a new thing to talk about every week is really that is really hard, because it's almost like I have to read like a certain amount of stuff, I feel like, to find the thing I want to talk about. And that's also becoming really, really difficult, is actually getting the time just to read a bunch of stuff to find what I would want to talk about in the first place.
Hmm.
So, and that's, you mentioned it earlier, I'm probably doing too many things, and it's all like my own fault. It's nothing to do with anything else apart from just my own like need to be doing things. But yeah, they're like, as I said, I'm sure you've probably had the same thing, doing sketch and stuff, like writing. But it's like there are weeks when it's just really really tough. It's like
Oh,
really hard.
yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, that's the reason why I stopped doing sketched, is because trying to take on, like, when I was doing sketched, I was doing a podcast, I was doing like three or, 2 to 3 articles a week, one of which is typically
Mhm.
a long form article that I've been researching for somewhere between a month and like 6 months. and
Yeah,
like those articles were typically between like 3,000 and like 8,000 words, and
yeah,
so
they're amazing though.
yeah,
Yeah,
well,
they're
thank
quite,
you,
yeah.
thank you. But I mean, I was doing that, and I was doing that all by myself, and like every once in a while, I'd have like a guest. Like my problem is like I have this horrible part of my brain that is like I used to be one of the main people at Multiversity Comics. I was an editor there, and one of the
Mhm.
weird things is like I am kind of like I'm like a man that is an island, and like a lot of times, like I don't know, I get like weirdly competitive, and I just want to be able to do my own thing, and I don't want to like listen
Yeah,
to other people, and it's kind of funny because like I'm actually kind of an ideal freelancer in that way, because as
yeah.
long as like I have an editor that will like work with me, that's like gonna let me go, I'll be good,
Mhm.
and that's part of the reason why sketched worked for me, is like I could do what I wanted and kind of handle everything how I wanted to do it. But the problem
Mhm.
is like it's a really good way to burn yourself out,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
tough. I
yeah.
mean, like you're, I'm not saying that you're going to run into the same thing, or you are running into the same thing, but I mean, Strip Panel Naked, you have Under the Hood, you got going your new podcast about Watchmen, and then you also have Panel X Panel. I mean, that's a lot going on. But the good thing about you is you're much better about being a teammate than I am. So good on you.
That's the thing, that's like with panel by panel, that's the thing that's why I love that a lot, because that is like a ton of work, and it's really stressful. But in terms of like actually like writing, that I only write like one bit of that magazine. I write like 5 or 6 pages out of 80 plus each month. So that is like a really, and under the hood as well is like, that's just like fun for a couple of
Yeah.
hours. Like, so those two things, yeah, panel by panel. Even it's weird, because that's probably takes up more time than Strip Panel Naked does. Like, in terms of like actual man hours,
Hmm.
because it's just like constantly like, it's being an editor, so it's like chasing people down and just making sure people are happy, and finding article ideas for the magazines we're going to feature and things like that.
You're
But
spinning
like, but then,
plates.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But then actually writing it, it's like, it's really refreshing, because
Oh.
it's I only have to do one very small bit of that whole magazine, and that's so nice.
Hmm.
That's such a relief.
Yeah, no, I think that is a very good thing that you do. And I do want to say that I think it's really funny that I got your name right, but I said Panel X Panel instead of Panel by Panel.
Yeah, everyone's been going with panel X panel. I think panel by panel is definitely a thing that like only I realize it's called that.
Oh, believe me, I feel that because like my website was called Sketched with no vowels in it, and like people are like
Scooched.
SKTC Scooch. What? I'm like, you have no idea how hard it is to find a domain name in 2017. I had to go with no vowels. It was the only one I could afford. But anyways, yeah, no. So I do. I feel everything you're saying. The last thing I want to say about Strip Pound Naked before we move on, though, is the one thing I don't like about Strip Pound Naked is you make me feel like I'm bad at reading comics. How dare you, Hassan?
Sorry, that's not the thing that I always feel bad about is there's always like a couple of people after every episode who are like, it's just another thing I've got to buy, and I'm like, I feel your pain because I've done that with like good articles or reviews or whatever. You're just like, they've made it sound good, now I need to go and spend like 15 quid on that book. That's the thing that I always feel like really bad about is getting people to buy more comics because it's like I know how many like I know how bad that feeling is of just having to buy more and more comics.
Oh, that's not even what I meant. I meant literally bad at reading comics. I'm like, I don't analyze, I don't look at art remotely like you. I'm like, am I like a Philistine? Do I not even understand how comics work?
I'm probably just doing it wrong. I'm probably just like 90% of what I say is probably just nonsense that I've just made. But if you say it with enough authority, then then people just go along with it.
I mean, like your Moon Knight one, your very first one, I feel like made me understand comics better, and there is extreme value to that, and I think that's very impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a very nice thing to say.
So, but I before we get into your other projects, I want to talk about Patreon really quick because I'm doing a Patreon, you're doing a Patreon.
Yeah.
It's what I find like Strip Pound Naked to be really interesting because it seems like it would be an awkward thing to try and monetize. I mean, you could do it in the traditional YouTube methods, but I'm curious, what made Patreon the move for you to go with? As far
I
as
don't
funding it,
know.
you just
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think because it's such a niche. So I think just because it's a very niche sort of channel,
sure.
and having seen the sort of views you would need to get on YouTube for it to make anything back that would kind of fit the time that it takes to make an episode, like I'd have to be doing a lot better than I am on YouTube. Like it. So I haven't got. I think I've got one video monetized, but that's purely because it means I can schedule videos now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first one, which is probably the one that gets like it's been the most viewed video, but that makes me like 0.03 cents or something like every 2 months or whatever. It really doesn't make any money at all. I don't think YouTube, unless you're like a really good YouTuber, I don't think it's a very good. And you'll see even from like really popular YouTubers, they're on Patreon as well, and even very very popular YouTubers aren't making like a ton of money through YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So Patreon was just the one because a few people had messaged me. Because I started fairly early from the channel, only like a month or so into the channel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because I had like 6 or 7 people message me saying, let me know when you set up a Patreon because I'd love to help donate to it and support and pledge and stuff like that. So it was I just got a bunch of those, and I just thought, well, I'll like let's just try it and see what happens. And it's done. It's done pretty well, and it does more or less. It's starting to more or less cover the amount of time ish that the episodes take. Yeah, I think it's I don't have like a lot of subscribers compared to like other like actual sort of big YouTube comic channels. But and also I'm never really gonna get to that level. You've got people that have got like hundreds of thousands of views, subscribers, and like. I don't think there's 100,000 people in the world probably that care about like visual storytelling in comic books. I think I just hit 12,000. I think that was probably about 11,000 more than I really ever expected.
Right.
And that's not even like hyperbole. Like genuinely, that's when I try and break the numbers down of people that like actually read comics. And I'm like, the 12,000 seems like a large amount of people that have got an interest in that. So I'd have to be hitting like a much, much bigger number than that. And as it became more of a thing, as like Strip Pound Naked became more of a thing that actually took up like a lot of my time, it felt like it would be nice if people were willing to sort of pledge or support in some way. But it also means I like Patreon because it means I can like write a bunch of stuff. And again, it's kind of like you were saying, you have like full control over it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like three like new bits of content every single week on Patreon, which is I do like a reading list of stuff I think kind of like complements the episode, like books or comics or films or whatever that kind of work around that theme. I do like a 800 to 1,000 word article on something else in that comic that I find interesting. and then I do like a bunch of like annotations of about 5 or so pages from whatever comic or even something like comic sort of like related. So I do one of those, like I do that like every single week because I feel like it's weird because it technically on Patreon they're pledging support for like the YouTube show.
Hmm.
But then I sort of feel weird about it because I'm like, well, I probably make it anyway. So like, let me give you something,
Right.
like buy this sort of thing. Like, hey, that $5 pledge gets you this article every week, as opposed to just the YouTube. I don't know. I feel really, it's weird. It's a really weird thing because it's like people are giving me money for this thing, and like they don't really have any control over it. So I feel like there should be, that's not really how Patreon's meant to work, I suppose. But like, I just feel like there needs to be like a brand new thing to justify that. I don't know. Maybe it's like a weird British thing.
No, no, I'm the same way. I was actually going to ask because I feel like having a Patreon makes you feel like you're compelled to create things for these people because they're supporting you, and it's like
Yeah.
you said, like with off panel, I would be doing that anyways. So like I have an article pretty much every week. I like give people the option of submitting questions or listening to the podcast early and doing things like that. I'm actually even starting up like a podcast within the podcast where it's like a monthly like show just for patrons where my buddy Brandon and I actually just talk about comics rather than me interviewing somebody, which is funny.
That's
Like
cool.
I brought this up before. I don't know if I ever mentioned this on the show before, but it's like I've had some pretty big guests. And like the funny thing is my episodes with Brandon, my friend who I've known for a while, and like we talk about comics that he was from Alaska, do as well as the best of them. And it's funny because it's like, I'm like, I got like, Jonathan Hickman. And I'm like, well, I also have
Yeah.
Brandon Burpee. So Brandon Burpee's going to crush it. Anyways, no, I shouldn't have thrown out Jonathan Hickman. Jonathan Hickman, your episode is still bigger than Brandon's, but Brandon is surprisingly close. But there is the compulsion there. It's like, it's hard not to feel like that once people start giving you money because you feel like you have to give something of value to them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really strange because it's like, as I say, like they're giving it for the show because they like the show. But I have this thing I really wanted to make my Patreon like the best Patreon in terms of like stuff you get back from it. I really want to make it like really worthwhile. It's like I want people to like, because I always have to feel like at the start of the month when the pledges are processed that people are going to look at it and be like, oh, I'm still on that. Like, what do I get for that? And I want them to go back on it and be like, oh, well, there's loads. Like, I just feel like I want to give people like a really good value for money for that, which it's sort of self-defeating because I look at some other patrons that are really good, that do really good numbers. I guess because they probably, the YouTube base is bigger, and like they might just have like get your name in the video, and it's like, well, that'll be easy. Like I should do that.
That seems way
easier. Save me a
easier.
lot of time. That would be a great idea. That would save me a lot of time every week. But yeah, I don't know. I have like a need, but also because I like doing that stuff anyway, and it's kind of like an excuse to do it, and it's like a reason to do it, and to write a little bit more and to do that sort of stuff. So, and it keeps me sharp, I think, in a way as well.
Yeah, it is always good to keep doing those reps so you can keep your voice strong. But speaking of which, I want to talk about Panel by Panel, your monthly digital comics magazine that spends half of its length digging into one comic in particular. The most recent issue is Redlands. The week that this is probably going up will be the week that the Savage Town issue goes up. The rest of the issue looks at a variety of regular subjects called, I think it's just called Regulars.
Yeah.
So what's the origin story of that? What made you want to do a magazine of that sort?
Stupidity, maybe. Probably. No, I was writing at Comics Alliance, and that was probably like the dream job, because you were talking about when you're freelancing, it's kind of like you can do whatever you want, and that was like at Comics Alliance, I could do whatever I wanted, and that it was probably like the best and worst experience because that was the first time anyone was specifically paying me for an outlet to write about comics. And under Andrew Wheeler, the only time I ever spoke to him about what comic I wanted to write about was the very, very first article, and that was it. And it wasn't even like he told me not to do something. He just sort of said, like, he just sort of asked me what I wanted to write about, and I threw him a couple of ideas, and he went, yeah, maybe do that one. And I was like, okay, cool. And then that was it. And then for 6 or 7 months or however long I was writing there, I just wrote an article every week, put it on the website, and it got approved. So it was a really, really cool experience. And when that closed, when Comics Alliance closed, which was heartbreaking, but much more heartbreaking for the people that had been there a lot longer than I had, I wanted to keep doing that article because I really, really enjoyed doing that article. But I realized that there wasn't a lot of places that were willing to pay me to write strip panel naked,
Hmm.
even though Comics Alliance had given it a home. There was places that would but didn't want to pay. There was places that would pay on like a page per click rate, which probably wouldn't do very well under strip panel naked.
Hmm.
So I felt like I wanted to find a home to keep doing that writing, but I I figured if people weren't going to pay me, then I may as well just do it myself,
Hmm.
and retain some kind of control over it. So it was again, I was, to reference Dennis Camp. I was speaking to Dennis Camp, and he mentioned that he was like, you should make like a website or something, and I thought that was probably just way too much work. And then slowly the idea developed to do like a magazine, because I'm a really big film magazine guy. Like I love Sight and Sound magazine, which is in the UK, and Little White Lies, which is heavily sort of a big inspiration for Panel by Panel. And I wanted to create something that was like a tangible like thing, because I feel like that makes it less disposable than just going onto the website and seeing what's new today. Like I
Hmm.
wanted to make like a thing that feels curated and a product that feels like you want to devour the whole thing, and like it's like designed in a certain way. Um, so I want to bring some of that kind of like design elements that I'm maybe not like very good at design, but I find it really interesting. So I want to try and make something that was very designed, and Strip Bound Naked would just fit. It would just be a part of it. I don't think I could do that like a whole Strip Bound Naked magazine. That would just be insane. But I wanted it to be part of it, and it would give it a home, and then also give it a home for some other people whose voices I thought were particularly interesting. Um, but then I can't remember why specifically it was a magazine that I chose, but it just seemed cool to have a thing. And then the whole like diving into one particular issue every month was that Little White Lies does a similar thing, and I always found it really really cool. It's like they have like one feature film, and they just have a bunch of people write stuff about it, and it's kind of like free form about what you could write about and what you could read about, and the articles are always going to be a little bit different. And so I really wanted to take that model because no one else was doing something similar to that. And I
Hmm.
like the idea when you go and see a film, if you go and see like Dunkirk or whatever, you leave that film, and if you want to, you can go online and you can find a bunch of writing about it. You can find people's like articles about Dunkirk, or you can find if it's historically accurate, or you can find analysis on the storytelling, or you can find information about like the score and what do people think about the score. There's loads of film writing, but if I go and read like Uncanny Avengers or whatever, I'll find a couple of reviews about it, and I'll maybe find like a few hot takes about why it's bad, but nothing that would like support or like further my reading of that comic. And I wanted to try and make something where like you go and read a comic, and I've got a thing for you to read afterwards that you can really get into and get excited about, and learn a bit more, or see something a bit differently, or do you know what I mean? It's like I
Yeah,
wanted to
100%.
create like a thing. And yeah, that's really all Panel by Panel was meant to be.
Yeah, no, I mean, as a person who religiously like reads IMDb trivia pages and goes and reads a bunch of random stuff about movies, I did want to underline what the Dunkirk score was like was stressful. That was the answer.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, but anyways, no, I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really great thing. The interesting thing is it does two things. One, it fills a niche in the sense that like there is nothing else like it in comics, and how it approaches a single comic, but also touches on a lot of different things within it. And it also has a casual tone, because you also have like the interviews like where was it Rob Williams interviewed Chris Weston in this current issue, or did I mix that up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that was it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So like you have interviews like that where it's creators interviewing creators. It kind of touches on a lot of things that I think like I was kind of personally thinking about already. But the other thing I think is really interesting about it, and not to get too capitalistic, is it introduces a new monetization model to it that's not really currently an option for comics journalism. Like I know there's a Comics Mint where you can pay, contribute to their Patreon and you get access to their
Mhm.
newsletter. But I do think that the subscription model is something that is very much worth looking into as far as that. And like sports journalism is currently doing a lot in regards to that. There's like this new site called The Athletic, and they're getting some of the biggest writers about sports in America to write about football, basketball, baseball, etc. And it's all subscription based. Like you have to
Mhm.
pay to get into it. And in an era where it's increasingly difficult to make money off of YouTube views or banner advertisements or everything like
Yeah.
that, getting $2 for like something concrete, like an issue of Panel by Panel, is it $2 or 250?
The first issue was two, and then everything subsequent has been 250. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it is very it's exciting for me in that way. That's just how my mind works. So I went to school for business, so I always look. It's kind of like my wife with the glass. Whenever I look at things like that, I can't help but view it from a business standpoint. But yeah, no,
Well,
I think it's fantastic.
I think like people are willing but I think people are willing to pay money. This is what I thought from Strip Panel Naked. I'm giving people stuff for free, and they're willing to pledge some money towards it because they think it's good. And so if I can give someone a tangible product that I feel is good quality, and hopefully they feel is good quality, I think people are willing to pay for it. And especially if it's something that they can't find anywhere else. I think if you found like comicbook.com or CBR or whatever that started doing a lot more of the stuff that we cover in panel by panel, the value would probably go down a little bit. But I think our value is that we've got creators on board. We've got voices who you might not necessarily see on those bigger websites, and we're giving them free reign to talk about what they find interesting rather than what we think is necessarily going to drive views. Because it's not the magazine, again, it's like Strip Panel Naked in that it's not really like views orientated, in that we don't need to have like 20,000 people click a certain link to exist. But what we want to do is create some good content, and then that hopefully will drive readers. But it means it's just like this little curated thing, and I think people are happy to pay. That's the hard thing, is figuring out the price point, really. But I think people are happy to pay for content they deem is worth that money.
Mm-hmm. I think that something you found with this is that people do. I do think that there are people out there who want what you're providing, and like the idea that there aren't is like something that kind of like, or like, you brought up CBR and comicbook.com, not to cast aspersions about peers or whatever, but at the same, they're putting out a product to me that is very base and very clickbaity oriented, and it's very unfortunate because it's going off the assumption that people don't want depth. And in my experience, like I not to transition to my stuff, but I write like 8,000 word articles, and they're shared thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and it's like, clearly there is an audience for these things. You're finding that with panel by panel, and it's fascinating that there is this idea that there isn't an audience for it, and that's the reason why these sites are doing it. I think your experience is a perfect example that there is an audience for that.
Well, I think if you're working at the level that they're working at,
sure,
I think there's a balance to be had.
Yes,
but I firmly believe that people go to those websites because they see them as some kind of authority,
right?
And I'm going to CBR because you guys know what you're talking about, or I'm going to comicbook.com because you know what you're talking about, and your writers know things that I don't know. That's why I want to read the top 5 times like Deadpool's said a swear word or whatever it is, because I don't know that and you do. So that there is like a natural transaction between, what you're talking about, and I'm going to learn a little bit from you, or I want to read a bit from your authorial writers. That's not the right way of saying it, but your writers that know stuff. But what I think what comes with that is that there is a responsibility from those websites that they can guide the discussion a little bit more than necessarily than maybe they do. And I think sometimes a lot of that stuff feels like really reactive than it does proactive.
Right.
And I think if those websites took the time to do even once a month or once a week a long form article. It doesn't need to be like a crazy David Harper 8,000 words, right? But there is you can do a longer form article that goes a bit more in depth, and some of them are doing it still, and that's not to take away from the work they do. But if they were to present it in a way where it feels more important, if you were to put it at the top of the website and maybe even do a couple of related articles around it to drive traffic back towards it, a couple of clickbait pieces that take you back to the long form article, or a poll that takes you back to the long form article, or whatever, or discussion points and things like that. And if you create a base around it, that people will view that as important, and they will start to see that work and that long form work as important and as useful and as good. And you have the real drive and the platform, the base to actually do that in the first place. Like BuzzFeed, is the number one clickbaity website, right? And even they started doing long form journalism pieces, and they're actually like really good. And you can prove, and there's proof in the pudding that like people will read that stuff. They will, like you were saying with your articles, like they will read it, but you've got to present it in a way where you make it exciting for someone to read in the first place, because naturally you've got to train people out of your top 5 lists or your top 10 moments when lists. You've got to get them used to reading these slightly more long form articles, but there are ways to do that cleverly. And what that'll do is it means ultimately you're creating more interesting content. You're making the medium itself a little bit more important, and you can drive new readership via that. like I don't know. I make maybe I make it sound really easy, but I think those people, those platforms, are the ones that should be driving this. Like it shouldn't. I don't think it really should be me because like my base, my audience base is so much smaller than theirs,
Right.
and I'm just appealing to a niche that is already reading comics and is just looking for this stuff. But like they could drive it further and they could make a bigger deal about this.
Hmm.
And I think I was saying on a different podcast. That like Wonder Woman, right, as a film that got tons and tons of hot takes and articles and long form pieces and like actual journalism written about it, right?
Hmm.
And yet you've got an amazing run by like Liam Sharp and Greg Rucka, which is very recent and very, very good. And why aren't comics websites doing similar stuff about that run? Why are they only writing that about the movie?
Hmm.
And there is all this stuff. There's a wealth of good content for them to be writing interesting pieces about, and they don't seem to want to do it because it doesn't immediately drive traffic. But I don't know. Again, I'm not an editor for one of those big sites, so I don't know how it works. But I feel like there is a way that they can set the agenda a little bit better, because if they just keep treating comics like a top 5 list, they're gonna kill it. And I mean, not like that sounds quite harsh, but you're gonna take the story and the discourse away from creators, from good stories, from good content, and you're gonna reduce it to nothing, to top 5 moments when Wolverine nearly killed someone or whatever. It's just
Yeah, that'd be a hard
it's
list.
it's it's damaging. I think that's what it is. I think it can become very damaging.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said
That was
like,
really ranty. I'm really sorry.
No, it's
you
okay.
Can feel free to cut that down.
No, I love it. I love it. No, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, they're being reactive instead of proactive. I think that there needs to be a balance between that, and I think your kind of stuff on panel by panel is proactive, and that's why I think people like it. Is like you're finding stories that people don't know that they want, but then it's like, if you're only taking orders, you're just filling the needs of what people think that they want. But if you like, let's say I go to Denny's and I'm like, or I don't know what Denny's equivalent is in the south of England, but like if you go to a restaurant that's just generic, like a chain restaurant, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get this because I know it's something I can get. But then you go to another restaurant and they're like, have all these things that you never heard of. Like there's this restaurant I really like in Anchorage called Pangea that has like this small plate called loaded tostones that has like fried plantain with pork belly and guacamole, and then it's covered in like
Nice.
a nice like kind of hot chili sauce, but it's like sweeter. And it's fantastic. And I never even heard of that food. That was like a food that I never heard of. But it's like, wow, this is giving me something that I've never heard of, but I really want. And it's like, I go back to that rather than going back to Denny's, because it's like, they're going to give me something I actually want. So I don't know. Not to compare CBR and comicbook.com to Denny's, but apparently that just happened.
No, but it's right. It's like because as I say, you go to those websites because they can offer you something that you didn't already have, and it's like it should be down to them to be really like leading the charge. But yeah, I don't know if for some reason it doesn't feel like there is, and maybe Comics Alliance is probably like a good example of maybe why they don't do that, because Comics Alliance, while it had a bit of that kind of clickbaity stuff, it probably wasn't not as much as other websites did, and it didn't last. So it's a warning sign maybe that like my style might not work, but I don't know. I think if you yeah, it works for me, but I think that's what I'd like to see from other sites. Is I'd like to see them, probably being more proactive than reactive.
Absolutely,
that's probably the smartest thing I've ever said.
That's very good. I love it. I love it. So, just a few more questions. Panel by panel, do you have a pretty set structure for how you're going to do you know what you're going to do issue to issue? Like, do you have a plan several months out for what comics you're going to feature in like the issues, and do you have kind of an idea as to how, one thing? Okay, this is a poorly phrased question, but the first issue I thought was interesting because the comic spotlight, your reviews were interspersed were like in a big chunk, and then the second issue they were kind of sprinkled throughout. Like how much are you looking to evolve the structure as you move along, and how like is it more set, or is it more like you're figuring out as you go along?
It's fairly set. It's just the comics highlights thing was my version of reviews.
Sure.
Was reviews without doing reviews. It was just people saying, "Here's some stuff I really, really like, and I like, and you should check it out." And my brief always for those was just like it's almost like you're talking to a friend. It's just like a comic you've read, and you just want your friend to read it.
Yeah.
And so I got some feedback from the first issue. Some people said they really liked that format of having them in one big chunk, and some people said, they didn't. And I was erring on the side of not liking it in one big chunk, because the thing is, it's kind of weird content. So I think it works better interspersed and kind of collected in groups. So that's what we try and did for the second issue. Not much is really changing between issue 2 and 3. I kind of like that approach to it. But I'm always willing and always happy to kind of adapt as it goes and see what people are responding to, and if there's a type of content that people are really, really liking, let's give them more of that. But again, part of it is just the remit for it is just what do I find interesting, and that's probably a little bit self-centered, but like that's what I want to make stuff that I get excited about. And I just hope that I can get other people excited as well. So really, it just comes down to like, what books have I seen that I really, really want to talk about? So Savage Town was like a comic that Dex showed me when we were drunk at Thought Bubble last year on his phone. And I was like, that looks amazing. And he sent me some bits and pieces since then. And I was like, we definitely need to talk about that. Beautiful Canvas was one that Ryan had sent me a preview for months before. And I just got really, really excited about it. I thought it was a great first issue. Redlands was the exact same thing. I saw a preview of that and I was like, we have to talk about that. Issue 4. When's this going to go live?
This is going to go the 18th. I was going to say, if it's going to be announced before the 18th, you can feel free to say it. If not, I'm not going to tell anybody.
We could probably announce it on this, maybe. That's the reason for some people to tune in. That's good.
Yeah, there we go.
Issue 4 was one that was a book I really, really wanted to talk about, but it was, as you'll see from the types of books we talked about before, they've been like indie books. So Beautiful Canvas was Black Mask, and Redlands was Image, and Savage Town's Image. And there was a book from DC that I really, really wanted to talk about. Big fan of the writer and the artist on it. And luckily DC was interested in it and sort of asked me about it. And so Mr. Miracle is what we're going to be covering for issue 4.
Wow.
So I'm really excited about that. And the issue after that I probably won't announce yet, but there's a book I've been really, really excited about for a long, long time. I've been watching it develop before it's been released, and it's really, really good. So it's just stuff I get excited about. And I just want to talk about, and then it's just rallying a bunch of voices around and just saying like, hey, what about this, or what about this, and throwing ideas around and seeing what people kind of want to write about.
Yeah.
I feel like if I can get excited about it, and I'm not the easiest person to get excited about things, if I can get excited about it, then hopefully other people can get excited about it as well. And that's really the whole remit for it. And a lot of the back end stuff just takes care of itself, to be honest. So like the creator by creator is just who do people want to interview next, and let's arrange that. The short comics are just I get sent a bunch, and let's just pick something that we think is interesting. And the 5 questions with, again, is just I just want to find some creators that I really, really like. So we've got Dave Gibbons in the next issue, the Savage Town issue.
Wow.
That, which is a really, really cool one. We've got Kelly Thompson, who's just Hawkeye, in the issue afterwards. So it's just people that I like, that I think are kind of interesting. And then writers who I love, other journalists who I am a big fan of as well. Claude Claire from Women Write About Comics has got a piece in the latest issue in Final Thoughts, in issue 3, the Savage Town issue. And David Bailey, who I'm a big fan of, done some 2000 AD stuff and did that Red Thorn Vertigo book. He's in the next issue doing Final Thoughts. So it's really just like, it's an excuse to like contact people I really admire and just ask them to if they want to write something. I need to ask you as well. I don't know how busy you are, but I was hoping.
I was starting to feel like very envious because you're like, oh, all these people I like, and I'm like, I haven't been asked. Jeez.
I genuinely, I need to ask you. So this is a good time to ask you. I can put you on the spot as well because you can't really say no.
Yes, Hassan. I say yes.
That's all it is. It's just a chance to just talk about stuff I think is fun and ask people I like to write about stuff.
Well, I mean, if you ever need somebody to write something about fantasy sports by Sam Bosma, I will be more than happy to do it because I'm like a one-man army for that book.
Perfect.
Okay, well, I want to finish with a few quick questions about a variety of subjects. I want to start with Under the Hood, your Minutia podcast with Kieran Shiok about Watchmen. What you're digging into it page by page. Each podcast is a page. Where did that come from? I know that the minutia thing minutia podcast thing is a thing, but page by page, that's mind blowing. How did that come together?
That was genuinely just Kieran like tweeted it.
Yeah.
And he was like, I think he just tweeted something like he'd love to do a podcast with me that was just what like analyzing Watchmen. And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Like that's my favorite comic of all time. Let's do it. And that was it. It wasn't much more to it than that. It was just, it's the thing I love about that is I love that. I really can't like stress how much I love that comic book. And I know that people have got problems with it, and people think it's overrated, which is genuinely blasphemy. But it's just that is so much fun. It's just an excuse to like pore over that book and just look at it in hopefully a way that no one else has already. Like from my side, I'm actively trying to make sure it's not just like the various annotated Watchmen, but like in a podcast form. I'm trying to bring some of the kind
Your
of
own
strip
thing.
down naked. Yeah, that storytelling analysis stuff that isn't maybe done as much. Trying to bring a little bit of that to it as well. And Kieran knows basically everything about comics, so he's got like all the history down, and a lot of it is just me asking him questions about stuff from comics past. So it's good for me because I've learned so much just doing the first couple of episodes already. But yeah, it's just that's a really fun one because it's just I hope it just comes across like it's fun. It's just a chance for us to chat about something we both really really like, and a chance for me to learn a little bit of stuff on the way as well.
I do think it's hilarious that the first episode was 36 minutes long. I was like, oh my God, you guys are going to do so much. This is a long series. My God.
It's gonna take like I think it's like 8 years we worked out. It's something ridiculous
Oh
to
my
do the
God.
whole.
I believe it.
But you know what? Hopefully I'll live longer than 8 years, so we'll get it done.
I
We'll
have
get
to
it done.
admit, there was part of me when I first saw it, I was like, I want to create my own minutia podcast, but like dig into something super weird, like when the Punisher became the Angel of Death, or like Ultimatum or something like that. I'm like, I'm gonna do a counterpoint. I'm gonna do like super Philistine stuff, and you guys can do your fancy stuff. I'm like, remember that time when Punisher had ghost guns? That was awesome.
It's a really fun thing because it's like it also makes you look at stuff like a little bit differently because it's like you can't just race ahead. You can't just get to the book you really want to talk about. You've got to you spend like half an hour talking about a page, and it's weird, but it's been a lot of fun, and I really hope people kind of like enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask really quick. I had a patron question for you. One was curious, like, you're writing, you're editing, you're lettering comics, you're doing all that, you're podcasting, you're making strip panel naked videos, you're developing magazines. That's a lot of stuff. Are you still looking to expand your skill tree on like what you do, or do you think you're kind of at a good place, or are you just kind of always at a place where you're like a little bit restless and looking for new things to do?
Yeah, I think that's probably that's my kryptonite. That's my big flaw, is that I find it quite hard to like just to settle down and relax. I can't like yeah, it's a weird thing. I can't if I'm doing nothing, I feel really like uneasy. Like I feel like my hands need to be kept busy. I'm kind of happy now. I've kind of found a balance that I'm sort of happy with. And I'm not looking to do too much more. Like I think I just want to develop the stuff I'm already doing. I just want to try and get strip panel naked and panel by panel into more people's hands, digital hands and eyes and brains. I don't know how you put that. But yeah, I just want to maybe just get I just want to kind of develop that, and I'm having a ton of fun lettering books. Like lettering is so much fun. So I'm having a lot of fun lettering stuff, and a couple of things I'm writing. There's some development with that sort of stuff that hopefully people will see soon. So it's just I just want to develop those little things more and more. Like I said to you at the start, it's like storytelling is my thing. I get really, really excited about, and I just want to try and tell stories in as many different ways as possible.
Sure.
But it is really like a restless thing. It's like it's probably very unhealthy, and it'll probably like a thing I'll have like genuine therapy sessions for in like 10 years. But for now, yeah, it's just I kind of feel a need to keep busy.
Well, I think it's a healthy thing. I mean, you're finding you have passions.
I don't know about that.
Well, it's a relative. I mean, you have passions. You're finding ways to like bring them out in your life. I mean, a lot of times people just I always like live life by the idea that I'm gonna regret the things like. You regret the things you don't do. You don't regret the things you actually do. It's like you're not going to look back and be like, I wish I hadn't done strip panel naked because that was a lot of work. You're going to be like, wow, that was awesome.
Yeah.
But if you didn't do it, you'd be like, wow, I really wish I went back and re-recorded that because I was looking at my dog and like I didn't go back and do it. It's like you're not going to regret it. I think it's really awesome and admirable that you're like digging into all those things as much as you do. But Hassan, that is actually all I have for you. I'm leaving you with a compliment. Feel special.
Thank
You're
you.
you're a
No, I
you're a
appreciate
pretty
it.
man.
I was gonna say like the first half of that saying was so eloquent, and then the second half
I,
just sort of fell apart a little
I butchered it. That's my life. I'm like, that's why I hope that people stop reading my articles after about 4,000 words because it's all just gobbledygook after that.
bit. It was good. No, it was nice. It was nice.
But thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I like this is a genuine honor. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with comics critic Hassan Otsmane-Elhaou. You can find him on Twitter at HassanOE, on YouTube at Strip Panel Naked, and his digital comics magazine Panel by Panel at panelxpanel.com, and on Twitter at panelxpanel. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Bobby Angus, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Null, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Barry Straw, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Barander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Matt Pataglia, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow me on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track, Outro, from the album Bullmilch, opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.